Welcome back to Movies TV Mad and a very warm welcome to Friday's edition of the DCU Daily. This weekend, Superman will cross the $300 million mark domestically, beating the entire domestic haul of Man of Steel. Domestically, Superman is running at a pace much faster than Man of Steel did domestically. That's not a surprise, that's not a shock. While Superman has struggled internationally, Man of Steel struggled domestically. Man of Steel struggled as much as Superman has done domestically, as much as Superman has done internationally. So Superman has struggled internationally, and Man of Steel struggled domestically. And that's an interesting thing to look at as well, how both of these modern day movies have struggled either in international territories or at home. That's very, very interesting. Now, I think this is the reason. Man of Steel is a fine movie that I absolutely adore. A great adaptation of the Superman character in a contemporary modern way. But the reason they struggled domestically because Superman is a traditional character and Goyer and Nolan and Snyder went opposite to the Superman traditions. And the American audience didn't like that. They said, no, we like a traditional Superman. That's what hurt Superman domestically. So why has Gunn's Superman movie struggled internationally? And don't listen to Gunn's bullshit about international audiences not knowing the character of Superman. I can't believe he said that out loud. All the bullshit he could have said, and he said that. International audiences clearly don't like the take that Gunn's come up with. But I think it's deeper than that. Because if you don't go out to see the movie, you don't know what it's like, right? It's clear that the whole thing with Snyder and Cavill affected international audiences, and that's why they stayed away. Now, WB claim that they're happy to bring in 500 to 550 million. This weekend, as well as clearing 300 million, it should get close or go past the 500 million mark globally. A figure that WB have claimed and their Access Media Shields have claimed is the figure they're really happy with. Because this is how WB and Gunn are looking at it. Because no first-time business, no shop, no industry makes a profit when it's first launched. Of course, movies are very, very different. Hollywood are very, very greedy people, always have been. Hollywood only exists for business. Hollywood has only ever existed for business. It's an industry, the people, the DNA, the blood type that have always run Hollywood thrive on making money, no matter how much they've already got. Let's not get it fucking twisted. Although Hollywood, what Hollywood used to do is say, we're going to give you some quality. We're going to distract you, we're going to entertain you, we're going to move you emotionally, and you're going to give us money for doing that. And we were like, yeah. So for the most of the past 100 years, we've been fine with it because they did something for us. Because cinema and television mattered so much for escapism. And, you know, basically moving our emotions. But they don't want to do that anymore. What they want to do today is get our head in a vice. A bit like a bog wash when they push your head in a bog wash and force our heads 24/7 in the real world. This is exactly what this Superman does. But by the way, so does Goyer and Nolan's and Snyder's Man of Steel. It's supposed to be set in the real world. It's grounded and relatable. And don't get me wrong, I love Man of Steel. I don't want people to misunderstand me. But that's the problem with entertainment today. And that's why Man of Steel was rejected by the domestic audience. And that's why, in a lot of ways, Superman has been rejected by the international audience. So, what WB is saying and Gunn is saying is this. Because this is a first movie, we'd rather we launch the DCU successfully than make a profit. We're happy to take it. We're not happy, but we'll accept a hit on this movie. So if we manage to cross 500 million, which they will, That's a figure they're going to reach, whether you want them to or not. The question is, how much more money can Superman make? Because whether we like it or not, it's done very well domestically. Do you understand? It's important to understand that. But internationally it's struggled, but it's still done okay. Okay? Now the question is how far Superman can get. Can he make another 100 million in the next couple of weeks and reach 600 million? I don't know. Looks unlikely. I just don't know. What's interesting is we all made a big deal out of Fantastic Four and Jurassic Park Rebirth being released in close proximity of Superman. And ultimately, that didn't affect Superman. You could argue domestically that may have affected Jurassic World Rebirth more, and maybe it will affect Fantastic Four. 110 million domestically is the opening target I'm hearing for Fantastic Four. Well, Superman made more than that domestically, but like Man of Steel, Fantastic Four may do better than Superman internationally. What these films make separately doesn't matter. It's what happens at the close of business, when those films have had their runs, how much they've made altogether. But it's interesting, isn't it? If this Superman movie has launched the DCU successfully, they won't care if they make 500 to 600 million. It will not bother them. In fact, they'd be more than happy with $600 million. Now, a lot of people are saying, yeah, but it hasn't beaten Man of Steel. It hasn't. And there's been a lot of fanfare about it being Superman versus Man of Steel. I've even done that vibe myself. But we must remember that Man of Steel and Superman were made by the same company. And the same company profited by both movies. They're not in competition with Man of Steel. Look, beating Man of Steel is kind of important because it shows the decision to drive Snyder away and Cavill away and all Snyder's people and not finish the Snyderverse was the right decision. So it's an interesting situation. If Superman doesn't beat Man of Steel, it looks like it won't in total global box office, we'll find out. How will we know if Superman has launched the DCU successfully? It's going to be Peacemaker's numbers, but we'll really find out next year with Supergirl. If Supergirl opens bigger, both internationally and domestically, than Superman, then they've succeeded. Then the people are happy with what happened in Superman, generally. Look, you're going to find people who love Superman and hate Superman. And both sides of the argument can find people who loved Superman. And you can find people who walked out in the middle of it. It doesn't really prove a fucking thing. If we look at the MCU, it made over $800 million and people generally liked it, you know. And I don't think that it wasn't a divisive movie. People liked it, simple as that. But something very interesting happened after Iron Man. Iron Man 2 was shit. People hated Marvel. Hardcore Marvel fans hated Captain America, the first Avenger, hated the first Thor movie, etc., etc., etc. If Man of Steel had launched during phase 1 of the MCU, they wouldn't have been under as much pressure as they were when they launched in 2013, because they launched after the first Avengers movie, which was one of the most successful CBMs in comic book movie history. But when the MCU launched, when Marvel Studios launched, there wasn't really a lot of competition or hype around comic book movies. We'd have X-Men, X-Men 2, they were very, very, successful. X and X2 are two of the best comic book movies ever made. Raimi's Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, the same. But there wasn't that pressure there is today with comic book movies. And I feel if Man of Steel was released during phase 1 of the MCU, the pressure wouldn't have been there because a lot of people didn't even like a lot of the MCU, Marvel Studios, the Marvel Cinematic Universe's phase 1. But Man of Steel didn't release then. And that's part of the problem. But the problem with Man of Steel is it tries to make Superman something else and change what he actually is. In a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, he tries to, they try and change what Superman is. And you can't do that. When you're adapting something, I love Man of Steel, don't get me wrong. But when you're adapting something as iconic and pre-existing as Superman or anything else, you've got to stick to the basics. You can still make it grounded to a sense, but it was so dramatically changed to who Superman's always been, there was a pushback. And there was the problem with Man of Steel. So, in a way, you don't look clearly. WB wanted to make a huge profit with Superman. They wanted to make money. And interestingly, with the domestic box office being at least solid, their calculations, their marketing actually worked. What didn't work was internationally. For whatever reasons that is. What they were doing, what that film is, what Gunn was attempting to do, didn't work internationally, right? So there's a divide, like there was with Man of Steel domestically and internationally. It's the same thing. In fact, it's basically the same results all over again. Because it's looking like, the best case scenario for Superman is that it equals what Man of Steel already did. That says that both these reinterpretations have divided audiences. That's the problem. Divided audiences. So this is what happens when you look at something and you don't look at the character and say, maybe we should just keep him the way he's always been. Neither Snyder, Goyer, or Nolan wanted to do that, and neither did Gunn. Gunn tried to fix the perceivable problems of Man of Steel, but then created new problems. So it's very, very interesting what's happened there. But yeah, they're not going to make a big profit, but potentially the solid box office of the domestic means that the DCU could have been launched quite well by Superman. And we'll see if there's actually interest in this franchise going forward. But there's a deeper question to be asked, boys and girls. I believe that it's been a terrible year for comic book movies. 2025 could be the year where the comic book movie actually died. When you look at all the movies that come out, moderate box office for every single one of them, right? And I pre-warned this, that maybe it wouldn't be a great year in the box office for comic book movies. And let's be honest, it hasn't been. Not one of these movies has been impressive in terms of box office. This could be, this could be the year that the comic book movie actually died. And it's been struggling. Now, I pre-warned many times when they announced the DCU and it would be a connected franchise, I pre-warned that this would not work. That audiences weren't interested in interconnected universes within Marvel or DC any longer. And we had two pieces of evidence to prove my point. We had 2019's Joker that made over $1 billion, and we had Matt Reeves' The Batman that made $750 million globally after just coming out of a global pandemic. So that proves, that absolutely proves that what people want are standalone efforts from visionaries. They're happy to see a second one and a third one and maybe 4 or 5, whatever. They're happy to see that one director work in his own like Roadhouse. But what people are not interested anymore are spin-offs and sequels of interconnected universes and streaming spin-offs and this and that and the hero's cousin and the hero's cousin fourth time fucking removed, right? That's what people don't want anymore. That duck has passed. That time has passed. People don't want these plastic universes, and the shitty money they're bringing in actually proves that. But the Joker and the Batman have proven something else. That they'd rather see a Todd Phillips or a Matt Reeves make a set of comic book movies with depth and feeling and emotion and compelling events whose characters leap off the page rather than a plastic universe that's just being made for one reason and one reason only, to make the company money. Now, of course, they wanted the Batman and the Joker movie to make money, but the point being, the people making those movies, motivation wasn't just about money. It was about fulfilling their visions as artists. And this, my friend, is what the current audience want from comic book movies.